had the overnight watch on the threat board when the ghost came back for the 11th time, and by then, I almost didn't bother flagging it. We called it the ghost, because nobody on the Wraith wanted to put a real name on something we couldn't pin down. A flicker at the edge of the passive arrays, gone before the active suite could get a lock, always at the same bearing, relative to the gas giant we were holding station near. "3 weeks of Commander Reyes refusing to let anyone go active and spook whatever was out there into bolting, because a ghost that runs is a ghost you never see again, and a ghost that stays is a ghost you can learn from. So we watched it the way you watch a deer that's decided your porch light isn't a threat yet, quietly, patiently, without sudden movement. It never closed distance. It never opened a channel. It watched the way we watched, and some nights, doing the long math on signal degradation and orbital drift, I caught myself thinking it might be lonelier out there than we were. My console sat at the aft end of the threat board, close enough to the command chair that I could hear the captain's breathing change when something on the long-range plot shifted, and far enough that he never had to see my face when I logged another null result. 3 weeks of null results does something to a watch crew. You start narrating the silence to yourself, just to stay sharp. Bearing constant, range constant, signature consistent with prior contact, nothing to report, until the words lose their meaning and become a kind of prayer. I'd whisper it under my breath sometimes, during the long hours past midnight, more for the rhythm of it than the content, the way my grandfather used to run his thumb over rosary beads he'd stopped believing in decades before he died. The gas giant we orbited threw a banded amber light across the bridge whenever the shutters cycled open for visual confirmation, and I remember thinking, more than once, that whatever was watching us from the dark probably found that light beautiful too. It seemed a strange thing to wonder about an enemy we hadn't confirmed was an enemy. But 3 weeks of mutual silence breeds a kind of intimacy you don't get assigned a procedure for. The captain didn't share my sentiment. Captain Aldrich Voss, no relation, the name's common enough, ran this ship like a held breath. He'd lost a Corvette to an ambush 9 years back, off a frontier nobody back home could find on a chart, and he carried that loss the way some men carry a limp, visible if you knew to look, irrelevant to how fast he could still move. He never talked about it. He didn't have to. It was in the way he kept the Wraith's gun decks live on a 6-minute brief-to-fire status every hour of every watch. Ghost or no ghost. Threat assessed or not. Same bearing, same signature, Captain. It's not moving. Keep watching it like it is. The signature didn't grow the way a closing contact should. It simply resolved, all at once, the way a shape resolves out of fog when you've been staring at the wrong distance the whole time, and your eyes finally adjust. The next, a ship. A real ship, 400 meters off our starboard bow, close enough that our running lights threw long shadows across a hull that had been sitting there, cloaked or shielded, or simply built from something our sensors didn't know how to see, for who knew how many of those 3 weeks. Contact resolved. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Bearing 010, range 400 meters, mass and configuration consistent with a warship. Captain, it's been here the whole time. I will tell you what the Thren ship looked like, because I had a year to study the images afterward, and I never stopped finding new ribbed plating, new sensor blisters shaped like compound eyes, new evidence of a species that built things to last centuries rather than decades. It was long and segmented, like a spine laid out in vacuum, painted the color of old iron, and it carried no running lights at all. It had been there to watch us, the way an entomologist watches an anthill, close enough to count legs, careful never to cast a shadow across the nest. There was nothing crude about it. The hull plating overlapped in long, deliberate scales, the kind of construction that spoke of generations of refinement rather than wartime urgency. And when our floodlights finally caught it square, I could see fine etched lines running the length of the hull in patterns that meant nothing to me then, and would mean, eventually, everything. A record, the linguists later decided, of every system the ship had passed through and quietly catalogued on its way to us. It was not built to impress anyone. It was built to last long enough to never need to. What it had not expected, I think, was an anthill that had been watching it back. Because the moment our sensors resolved that hull, the Wraith's gun decks were already lit. Not powering up, already lit, already crewed, already tracking, the way they had been every hour of every watch for 3 weeks on the captain's standing order that none of us, including me, had ever fully understood the weight of, until that second. We hadn't reacted to the reveal. We had simply stopped pretending we hadn't been ready for it the entire time. I watched the Thren ship's own sensor returns spike and scatter in a pattern I'd later learn was their equivalent of a held breath. They had decloaked to make first contact on their own clock, in their own moment, the way a patient species does everything, deliberately, at a time of their choosing. They had not planned to find the thing they were studying already looking back. For 11 seconds nobody fired. I have never sat through 11 longer seconds in my life, and I include in that count the 9 seconds of a coolant alarm 2 years prior that turned out to be a sensor fault. Then the Thren ship did something none of our threat models had accounted for. It cut its weapon systems cold. We caught the heat signature drop in real time, and held position, not retreating, not advancing, holding, the exact way we had been holding, mirrored back at us like a creature deciding the thing in front of it wasn't prey after all, and might not be a predator either. Captain Voss didn't order weapons hot. He didn't need to, they already were. What he ordered, in a voice with no triumph in it at all, was for comms to open a slow, low-bandwidth hailing frequency, the kind that says we have time, and to send nothing but our ship's designation and a standing wait. It took the Thren 6 hours to answer. When they did, it wasn't with words we could parse. Not yet, not for weeks. But with a long, repeating tonal sequence that our linguists would eventually translate, roughly, as a question with no good equivalent in any human language. How long have you known? We never told them the true answer. 3 weeks. The same as their own vigil. I think Captain Voss understood, in the particular silence he kept about it afterward, that the honest number mattered less than the fact that we'd had one at all, and had spent it the same way they had, watching, not announcing. What followed was slower than any of us wanted, and steadier than any of us expected. 2 months of careful exchanges through narrow, deliberately limited channels, a treaty that nobody back home would call a victory, and that I have come to think of as the only kind of peace worth keeping. Cold, exact. Neither side pretending warmth it didn't feel. Both sides aware of exactly how close those 11 seconds had come to going the other way. I left the service eventually, the way most of us do, and I get asked sometimes by people who've heard a fraction of the story what it felt like, that first contact, decloaking and all. They expect awe, I think, or fear, the kind the recruitment reels promise. What I remember instead is much quieter than that. It was the simple, settling weight of finding out that the thing watching us across the dark had assumed it had all the time in the world, the patience of a species that measures itself in centuries, and that we had matched it hour for hour without once asking for credit. The Thren had come expecting to study an anthill. What unsettled them in the end wasn't our guns. It was that we'd never stopped being ready, and never once let them see it, until the exact moment we chose to.